looks like we better get going. Give our speaker all the time we can. I do not know Joann Stormer, but she's here as the executive director of the Rochester Foundation, and will inform us this morning of a lot of the things that they are doing. I read through some of her background things, and I won't read any of it, but one thing that looked familiar to me, one of the groups that she worked for at some time or other was the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And that rung a bell with me because I am a dentist. I was trained at the University of Michigan, and they had the W.K. Kellogg Foundation had built or certainly contributed a major share to the graduate school there. So I've seen that for 60 years now. So there is some familiarity. Joann's going to present the information for us this morning, and then she's going to, you're going to pass out the cards, you said?
Yep.
Okay. She's going to pass out cards for anyone who has questions, and that'll keep you on track. And we'll just turn it over to her right now. Go ahead, Joann.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if I press the right button. Is this, yeah, good. Good morning. I will tell you a little bit about my history. I have worked for nonprofits all my life. Actually, I started as a young person in a church, working, teaching Bible study, and so I've been connected for many, many different nonprofits. Red Cross, certainly I worked for a monastery at one point. I also was the executive director for a mental health organization in Wisconsin. I also worked for the university, and for the last 13 years, before I came to Rochester, I was traveling around the world taking leadership folks who were in Wisconsin. They were both government, business leaders, and nonprofit leaders to learn about what's going on in the world. And so they had an experience in the state, and then they had an experience in the US, and then they also had an experience in another country. And it was very interesting to be able to open people's eyes to what's happening in the world. And I did that again for about 13 and a half years, and I had a suitcase all the time packed, traveling all over the place, and worked statewide especially. And so when this opportunity was offered to me, I thought, you know, I need to be in a small community, not a small community, but in a community and help to make a difference in a community. And that's really what my purpose in life has always been about. How can I make a difference? How can I help make a difference in the communities that I live in? So that's a little bit about my history. Today what I'd like to share with you is what the Rochester Area Community Foundation is all about. And we have been here for over 71 years. A lot of people don't know about us because basically for the last number of years we've moved and 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 didn't know where we were at. Many people, in fact, the last place we were at for the last 6 years was on the 3rd floor of the corner of 4th and Broadway. And many people didn't really even know we were up there. Unless they stopped at the stop sign and they would look, you know, at the stoplight, and they would look around, and then they would see that our logo was up there. So now we have moved into a new building, a refurbished building, and many of you know who are here, and some of you are here as our donors as well, to a building that we hope will serve the community. So we have many community spaces, and groups are already using it, and if it's a nonprofit, you get a very small rate of use in terms of a charge. So I'll share a little bit about that. But what I'd like to do, start out today, is I've got these cards, and I always, when you're talking, sometimes people think of a question that they want to ask, and if you want to have a card and write that question down, thank you. That would be a great opportunity. Thank you. You don't have to, but if you, sometimes you think of something while I'm talking and it would be best to do it then. Okay, what I would like to share with you today is what is a community foundation first. Then secondly, a little bit about what the Rochester Area Foundation has been as a community foundation and the things that we have done. So that's kind of the scope of what I'll share, and I'll just share some slides with you about that. So I think if I can get this to go. Move this little arrow around there. Now I think I'm good. Okay, so first two questions I would ask you is, what do you think, what do you want to know about a community foundation, would be the first question. My second one is, after you hear about the Rochester Area Foundation, what do you think in the next 20 years we ought to be doing? Something that you think we ought to be addressing or working with. So I'll give you just a second to think about that one. And I'm a little bit nervous about my coffee sitting on here. I'm thinking this is not a good spot for here. All right. Okay, so if you think of some questions as you go along. So there are over 700 community foundations in the U.S. There are more around the world, but the first one ever started was in 1914 in Cleveland. That was the very first community foundation in the world that had ever started. Second one, Minneapolis Community Foundation, Chicago Community Foundation, New York, and Milwaukee were the first, I think, 5 community foundations that started. So 1914, 1915, 16. Rochester Area Foundation started as the 25th or 26th community foundation in the world, and which is pretty amazing because we're a small community. Usually, community foundations start in very big towns. Community foundations, so some of the things. Here are what all community foundations around the world do. They first do grant making. Second thing, they are about to improve the quality of life. That's their goal. They're also in a geographic location. So we serve the 7 areas around Rochester, 30 miles outside of Rochester we serve, okay? But there are the New York Community Foundation. It could serve the whole state. So some are just serving one county, some are serving 3 or 4 or 5, some are serving 10, and some are serving the whole state. But it is a geographic location. They're supported by a broad range of donors, both public and private. And they are governed by local people. So if you belong to this area, you could serve as our board of directors. And then we are also building capital endowment. And I'll explain the word endowment because that's slightly different for folks. Here's kind of an interesting thought. It's a platform. A community foundation is a platform to serve the community. Here's some of the things we do. Endowment funds, and this is all community foundations do endowment funds. They help create a legacy for donors who believe that they want to leave a legacy in their community. We help donors select the charities that they want to give to. Sometimes people have specific charities that they want to give to, but some don't know that there's some other ones that they would like to give to, and so we help you learn about the communities and the nonprofits. We also help local organizations. Nonprofits, we help them build their capacity. We also do many charitable interests. We'll do personalized donor services. We can be flexible and responsive to your unique needs. There's a wide variety of assets that we accept. So maybe if a small nonprofit will certainly accept a check, will certainly accept your credit card, will certainly accept cash. We can accept many, many other things. So if you had a famous painting that you wanted to donate, we could sell that, and then the donation would go into your fund or to a specific nonprofit that you wanted it to go to. So lots of variety of assets. A maximum tax advantage with us can happen, and we preserve donor intent, and I'll explain a great story. 1948, our first donor who passed away had a donor intent that her money would be used for a specific thing. It is still happening. It's happening, and it's been happening since 1948. And I'll explain some of that as we go forward. And then we're also prudent about stewardship. Many of us invest and have risky investments and make choices about that. You may say, oh, about half of mine I'm going to risk my investments. We tend to be more conservative in our investments so that they actually stay with the foundation and with your fund. Harry Harwick, do you remember hearing about him at Mayo Clinic? He was the one who wanted to start our foundation in 1944 with a whopping $3,500. For the first 40 years that we were here, and you'll see all the counties that we serve, we gave out in the first 40 years $1 million, and we had $1.3 million left in our fund, in our endowment funds. I'll keep explaining. Here's some of the first board members who were around at that time. Anyone recognize them? Not yet, okay. So our vision statement, we're about better communities for all. Our mission statement is about building and improving the quality of life in the greater Rochester area through philanthropic leadership and community partnerships. Our value statements: inclusion, integrity, stewardship, innovation, and collaboration. Here's some of our vital statistics of what has happened. So up till this day, we have approximately 330 funds, and I'll explain what those funds are. We have an annual, we last year gave out $2.3 million in grants in partnership with our donors. There were over 550 grants that went out to nonprofits, and also scholarships went out. 93% of our money is restricted. I'll explain that. That's a pretty easy one. If you are a donor and open a fund with us, you get to make the choices about where your money goes. We do not use your money. Does that make sense? Unrestricted money is given to us at times. We have donors who give at the end of the year or at some time into an unrestricted fund, which we call our Better Communities Fund. That money then is granted out twice a year to different nonprofits. But if you own your own fund and you have it with us, you get to make the choice about where your resources go. We have approximately $40 million in assets, and we have, over the past 30 years, our investments have been approximately 9.4% of growth. And we have about 6.5 staff people. Okay. Here's our 3 bubbles I always talk about. We do 3 things majorly. We're about philanthropy, and it's not just about us, it's about the community. It's about helping the community and many of the nonprofits, so we do philanthropy. We also do grant making, and we do community leadership things, and I'll explain those as well. So the power of philanthropy. Here's a whole bunch of people, families, individuals, couples, businesses, nonprofits, have all have funds with us. So it's a very big variety of people. And how can you get involved? You can meet with us. We talk with a lot of families, we talk with a lot of individuals, we talk with businesses and organizations. You can create a grant-making fund for as little as $10,000 with us. You can contribute anything, cash, securities, property, credit card, etc. So we talk very easily, and it can be as easy as a phone call to explain this to you and to show you a document. We have different types of funds. We have Better Communities Fund, which is the unrestricted money. We have a Field of Interest Fund. A field of interest, if a donor wants to open a fund and say, I'm really interested in the arts, and when I pass away, I make decisions when I'm still alive, but when I pass, I still want it to go to the arts community. So that's the only way. It will be a field of interest. A donor designated, we have a person who has made a contribution to every year. She has a fund with us, and she gives it to Oxbow Park every single year. That's a donor designated fund with us. Scholarships, there are many who open scholarships because they believe that someone gave them a scholarship to get through college, and they want to open and be able to give a scholarship. And they can even designate where that scholarship goes, to what school, to what type of, if it's healthcare, if it's environmental issues, if you have a particular instance. Then we have many churches and many organizations, nonprofits, that also have funds with us as well. You can do a donor advised fund. A donor advised fund is very simple. Document, you put in funding. You tell us every year, every month, every week when you want funding to go out of that fund. You tell us where it goes. We make sure it's a legitimate nonprofit, and we will pass it on to that agency. And you can be anonymous, or you can be told to that agency who you gave it to, from where it came from. We also have fiscal sponsorships, which are groups that want to do charitable things. And I'll give you an example. The Mayo ER group of nurses and doctors do each year a garage sale. They are not a nonprofit. They don't want to be a nonprofit, but they do it every single year, and they give it out to certain groups in the community. So they ask people to give to the garage sale, and then when you, the money goes through us, then your charitable contribution is as a charitable contribution, versus if you just give it to them, it isn't a charitable contribution on your taxes. So that's where the fiscal sponsorship can really help. We have a Heritage Society. If you look on our website, many people have made that when they pass, they would like a certain amount to go to the foundation or to a particular fund, and they tell us on a form and fill that out. Community affiliates, we have Dodge Center has a fund under us, which is actually a foundation. It's a community foundation, but they're under us, they're smaller, and as they grow, if they choose to be independent, they can do that as well. And planned giving. So we have opportunities, we have crats, and these words are really words that are, I can explain them, but they're really complicated, but they are around and available through us. Here's an example of the last 30 years. So if you start in 1979 and you put $10,000 and you did not add any single dollar to the fund, you gave out, over the course of 32 years, you gave out $41,000, and still remaining in your account is $30,500. Does that make sense? That's where the endowed fund is growing and keeping. It's not about trying to be risky, but it's more conservative over the last years. So you see the red bars, they go up and down. Some years are not good. 2008, terrible, terrible, terrible. Everybody knows that. This year, people know that it's not great. It's not as bad as 2008, because 2008 was really awful. 2009 wasn't great, but last year was not horrible, but it still was down in terms of investments. So, second circle that I talked about was grant making. Grant making is typically when a foundation opened, a community foundation, it would be money in and money out. That was the only cycle. Philanthropy, money came in, and then it went out to nonprofits. We do much more than that, and so do many other community foundations. So we are about how can we help the nonprofits in this community grow and do good work in the community. So we do workshops. We do about 8 or 9 a year. We charge a whopping $10 or $15 for a 3-hour workshop. Instead of traveling to Minneapolis, that takes a whole day out of a nonprofit's agency. So we do them locally, and we have a number of them, and they're posted on our website. We have community meeting space. We, in our new building, actually we can hold up to 100 upstairs. We also have nonprofit incubator space. So the Bio Business Center has place for incubator businesses. We have place for incubator nonprofits. And so they come and they have space. We have about 15 desks upstairs and allow them to be there for at least 6 months for free. And then the rent will go up about $10 or $15 for their space. They have parking. They can also use our community rooms as well. And downstairs in the Rochester Area Foundation space, we have a boardroom, and we also have a small conference room, and sometimes they are just packed, and it's a really good way to support the community. One of the things we did some years ago when I first came here was that the library was really about the only space that was affordable for nonprofits particularly, or small groups. And so, but what we heard was it was packed. There was usually only 1 or 2 spaces a month available at the library. So we said, can we support the community by giving and making available space, affordable space? So that's what we do at the, and last year we gave out 567 grants. And we also do in-kind grants as well, so that we can help those nonprofits. This is just an example of some of the nonprofits over the years. The very first grant we ever gave was to the Girl Scouts, $5,000 in 1946, I think it was, that we had given the first one. So there's many, many other organizations that we support. Here's an example. Last year, we gave out 567 grants. 34% went to health and human service organizations, 7% were scholarships, education was about 40%, community development was about 8%, arts and cultural was about 6%, and then other groups, maybe environmental groups or et cetera, were that last 5%. Now I'm on the third ball, the bubble, which is about community leadership. And again, just a reminder that early years, it was typically about every community foundation. It was money coming in from a donor, and then it would go out as a grant. Very much now, as we nationally know, that we are doing a lot of work to help address issues in the community. So the first one, I'll share with you these initiatives, and you've probably heard of some of them, which was First Homes, First Steps, We Give 365, the Nonprofit Academy, and Impact Finance. And I'll tell you a little bit about them. I'll probably tell you the longest story about First Homes. In the 1990s, I heard that there was a problem about housing in this community. The jobs were being added, but there wasn't enough housing. In fact, rental vacancy at the time was less than 1%. And if you wanted to buy a house, forget it. You couldn't find one. So many community groups came together, many businesses came together and said, what can we do to address this issue? And if you're Fastenal or IBM and you have an employee coming to live here, there were some stories that even said, I heard that there were some people actually kind of living in their car for a while because they couldn't find an affordable place to live. So they would maybe stay 6 months and then they would just move because they could not find an affordable place to live. So these businesses and the county and others came together along with us and started First Homes. We raised that first year with mail about $7 million, and then finally we also raised about $14 million. Many groups joined us together, businesses, cities and counties and lenders and builders joined with us to build affordable houses. Here's an example. So this would be a new one. When we first started, there were subdivisions being built. And some people could afford some houses, and what we did was give gap loans. So if the house was worth $150,000, but when you went to the bank and it only gave you $120,000, we would loan you $30,000. When you sell your house, that money comes back to the foundation to make it available for someone else. We also did a lot of community single-family construction with, we didn't build it, but a lot of developers did, and we worked in partnership with them. So these are some of the communities outside here, sorry. Here's an example when one of the other things we did was we started doing, saying that there were many houses in the community that needed to be updated. And they became a part of our community land trust. So here's a house, and here's what we did with it. Here's another one that we built, or that we bought, and this is what it looks like now. And 2 of those are affordable, and 2 of those are market rate. You cannot tell which one is which. So there's that sense of inclusivity. Did you hear that noise? Anyway, so it was a little inclusive about what we tried to do. So a community land trust house, you probably wouldn't know where it's at. We own the land, and the purchaser or the buyer will buy the house. And usually they stay in for about 10 years, families, singles, etc., but mostly families. And if the house again is worth about $120,000, and they do need a gap loan or they need help, we will help them with that as well and make it available. So right now in the area of Rochester area, we have about 212 community land trust homes. We're one of the largest in the country doing this work. So there, I think we're somewhere in the top 10 of those. Here's another large-scale development that we did. Cascade Creek, which is, I'm bad at directions, you know, like driving someplace. So Cascade Creek is in Rochester, and a number of these apartments are very under affordable. They're very low market rates. 4 of them, I think, are about $100 a month, and there is a group that works with them. The others are somewhat affordable. Something happened here. Somehow the electricity went. I bet the electricity went out, huh? Is it not plugged in? It isn't plugged in. Yeah, it is. Yeah, but it's not plugged into the rest of it. All right. No, that's. I don't know. Well, I'll just keep chatting until we can figure out what's going on here. I'll talk to you about the second thing. So affordable housing, we have done over, in the greater Rochester area, we've done over 11,000, or 1,100 housing units. Some of them are rental pieces and some of them are single family homes. Actually, we have over 600 single family homes and about 432 apartments that are affordable space. But as we move forward, the county, us, and Mayo said, you know what, we think we have a problem still. We addressed the problem at one time, but the community is growing. It's growing again, and we did a study together with Mayo, us, and the county, and found out that right now, in fact, if you look at, there are probably about 200 houses on the market right now, less than 4 under 200,000. So we did a study together, and the study said if you're elderly, there's less than 1% available under of the affordable market. And the affordable market says that a one-bedroom apartment is $900. That's not affordable. A single-family home is generally at $200,000 for a affordable house. I'll give you an example. You're a kindergarten teacher or a first grade teacher and you might be making $40,000. What can you afford? You probably can afford a house at $122,000. Where is a $122,000 home? They aren't available. Right now on the market, there's less than 4 that are available under $200,000. There are senior complexes being built right now, several of them that look pretty darn nice. I mean, that are very nice. Affordable? No, they're not.
No.
Whoops. So we've been working on trying to address the housing problem again in Rochester, and one of the things, last year when I got asked to speak out in Washington, D.C. about housing, one of the things we learned was we thought that when we addressed and spent that $14 million on raising houses and partnering with different developers and communities, etc., that the problem would be done. But if the community hadn't grown, it probably would be done. But the community is growing, and that's an issue that we have. That's all right.
There's no power cord for the computer.
Ah, okay. So that's all right. I'll just chat a little bit more and share it with you. Second thing that we did, there was a in the community, First Steps was around. And apparently there was an issue in the community that parents did not register their 3-year-old ready for kindergarten. And in fact, what we found was in 2000, there were less than 1% of children registering for kindergarten, their parents registering them. So we worked with a number of community groups, the public school district. We worked with many of the, I'm going to try to think of the preschool groups as well, to raise that number. And actually, over the last, over the 7 years that we were working on trying to get children to come and register, get their parents to register their children for kindergarten, we actually moved the needle up to 70%. And so that was a very good number. And now, as you may have heard, United Way is going to be working on that to again, work with the school district to raise that number even higher. And one of the things that we also did was there were many Hispanic families who didn't know how to register their children for kindergarten because they may have not understood the language, and yet their children were learning and wanted their children to be registered for kindergarten. We had many Somali families that we worked with as well, and we worked with business owners as well who had employees who were not necessarily understanding how to register their child for kindergarten. So we did a lot of work with that and partnered with many nonprofit organizations to move that forward. Another thing that we did certainly is we have this program called We Give 365. And it started 2 years ago, and it's an opportunity to give $1 a day. And if you give $1 a day throughout the year, you get to make a choice on where the money will go. And so the first year we had 50 participants who wanted to be a part of that program, and they made nonprofits who wanted to apply for a grant applied, and then many of the members who were a part of We Give 365 actually decided which groups the money should go to, and it went out as grant work. Another thing we did was the Nonprofit Academy, and we've been doing that in the area for about 3 years now, and we partnered with many local funders to do that work and help the nonprofits increase their capacity. We also did First Steps. I already talked about that one. I'm trying to think of the other. Last one would be the nonprofit again. Oh, Impact Finance. We are the only CDFI, Community Financial Development Institution, in this area, which is, I'll try to explain it to you because it's a very complicated piece, but years ago, probably I think it was at the Kennedy years, the U.S. Treasury decided that as many of the large communities, and I will share my example from Milwaukee, many people lived in the center of Milwaukee. They moved out to the suburbs. And when they moved out to the suburbs, there wasn't much left in the center city. So there were lots of poverty-stricken people who were living in the community. Grocery stores closed, banks closed. They were afraid of having space in the downtown or the core area of Milwaukee. So what the CDFI or U.S. Treasury started doing was saying, how do we improve these communities? How do we grow this area so that people who are living in poverty are not just living in poverty? How can they would go to a kitchen and or a food pantry and get boxed food. They never, for years, saw any real vegetables, which is good eating, right? It's good eating for all of us. And so if grocery stores closed and the banks closed and stores closed, and the only stores that were actually usually in downtown Milwaukee, you can guess it, it was liquor, right? And cigarettes. That's where the stores were. So how can we encourage people to and businesses to come into the community and help that community blossom? And the community financial institution can help that happen. It helps with lots of assets growing in the community. So I think I've talked about philanthropy, I've talked about grant making, and I've shared about how we are a community leader in the community and how we can help to address community issues. There are many more that we work on. I know transportation is a real issue in this community, and we've been working with many groups on that as well. So thank you very much. I will be more than happy to answer any questions, and if I can't answer it, I will follow up and tell you what I can do. So, questions? Yeah. Sure.
So you mentioned the United Way, and it seems like the grant making, there's a lot of similarities with the United Way. It seems more of the differences might be on the donor side, you have a bigger donor, but maybe you could talk about that, the contrast, and then how do you collaborate with, or do you coordinate with the United Way, I would assume?
Sure. Yep, we partner. In fact, when I came here, one of the things I really wanted to do was to make sure that all the funders in the community actually meet about once a month. And so we have breakfast together, talk about what's going on in the community, what we can support, and how we can support each other. United Way is slightly different than a community foundation. United Way will support annually. They do not do endowments. They do not generally cannot accept securities and et cetera things that they would usually do. So they really focus also on, I think it's 4 key areas: health, human services, education, and one other area which I always forget. Whereas we as the community foundation can support any nonprofit. So if you were interested in an environmental thing, United Way would not support that. So that's kind of the difference. They do annual funding and a focus on certain nonprofits. We do all nonprofits and are really more about endowment than just a single year contribution. So that's a way we can partner together as well. So, does that make sense? Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
So how do nonprofits associate themselves with you? Do you seek them out? Do they come to you? How do you develop that relationship? Or do you know of every nonprofit in town and assume they're a partner?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things by starting the Nonprofit Academy, we had nonprofits come out of the woodwork that we had never heard of before. So that's a good thing. And so many of them, are able to attend a workshop at $10 or $15 about marketing and get 3 hours worth without having to travel to the cities and spend the entire day. And I don't mean it's not wasted day, but when you're traveling back and forth, that's a long distance. So when it's closer, it's much easier for them. We also have a list of the nonprofits, but I will tell you that one thing that changes is many executive directors change. Typically, in the years that I've been involved, as I said, with nonprofits, typically it's usually about 3.5 years that you'll see the executive director change. And so at times we have to find out who is the contact that we can make that connection with. Many of them, even if they don't have a fund with us, and maybe they haven't gone to the workshop, they often come to us and say, we're really looking to increase our capacity. Could you help us with an in-kind resource to help us raise our funding? So we'll do a contract with them, which is an in-kind service that we'll provide them with. And then many are interested in finding space to be able to use. Children's Museum, you know where that is. Well, it's just down the block from us, or a half a block. Well, they don't have enough space, so they come and use our facility for meetings with their board, with meetings with their staff, as a way to kind of, does that help explain some of it?
Yeah.
Yep. The other thing I will say too is that we are working with a number of nonprofits or individuals that would be interested in starting a nonprofit. So in the incubator space, as they look on our website, they will maybe have a conversation with someone they already know, and they're working with the possibility of beginning a nonprofit to actually get it going.
Do you vet these nonprofits at all?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So if you're a donor, most of our donors here locally give locally to nonprofits. But there are a number of donors who say, I went to school at Georgia University, and I believe that I got scholarships there, and I want to give so that there are scholarships going there. We can do that. You can also do it internationally. It's a little bit tougher because it's tougher to find that and to make sure that it's a legitimate nonprofit. And that's really an important piece that we have to check out, so, yeah.
And where can we find you?
12 Elton Hills Drive, Northwest, right on the corner of Elton Hills and North Broadway. We are, it's that bright yellow building. Yeah.
My question addresses diversity in Rochester.
How much activity, how much discussion, what kind of groups? Could you tell us a little bit if you have had much to decide about with our increasing subject of diversity, which is right in the forefront? Yeah. I don't know if any of you knew that Senator Walz was here.
Yes.
This week and used our, along with the Diversity Council, used our space upstairs, the community room, to talk about diversity in the community and how do we address some of the issues that are happening. Certainly, and one of the things that we are doing personally is, a Somali group used the space upstairs. They had dinner up there, and it was time for evening prayer. So in the hallway here, everyone knelt and did their prayers before the evening and used the space, just as any other groups are using it. We're also working with Somali group, we're working with a Hispanic group, and it was in our incubator space as well. So this is really a good opportunity to invite them, to be a part of them, to understand their culture, for them to understand our culture, and to have a relationship around how do they support their communities? How do they help children? I met last week with a Somali group, and my story was actually almost the same as their story, and they couldn't believe it. I'm the first in my family who ever graduated from high school. My mom and dad, 2 languages. They grew up in Canada and moved to the United States. My father had 11 children, 4 of them died from malnutrition, so really grew up in poverty. My mom, her father passed when she was 9, and mother never remarried. And and my mom went to the 6th grade. My dad went to, tried to get in the military, finally got into the Marines, but he weighed, I think, 80 pounds. He was, because of, malnutrition. And so, as I was sharing that story, they were saying, this is kind of interesting because they have 2 languages. Some of their families have only 1 language, but their children now are growing up here with 2 languages, and sometimes even trying to help their parents understand when they go to school for a conference. So there are things, and I would say maybe there's others in this room who have had that same experience as well. So they're finally kind of trying to learn the language, but they also are trying to understand the culture as well. And yet they want their children to also understand their culture. As my parents struggled with, they were told, don't ever teach your child how to speak French. And I never did. I never did learn that. Even though I could understand when my parents talked, I just didn't know how to really speak it very well. So I think that these are things that are happening in the community, and it's changing. And it's a good thing, but I think we need to be open about it as much as we can.
So are more community members going to these sessions? Are you encouraging the community to hear about this?
Yeah, I think we are encouraging the community to hear about it, but at the same time, I think it's still a tough story at points.
You need the whole community to be hearing these things.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
I just encourage you to do
Yeah,
that.
good, thank you, thank you. Other questions?
Joann,
Yeah, oh, sorry.
couple quick questions. Does the foundation write grants to try to get grant money from federal government, things like that? And the second question is, what would be my advantage of giving money to the foundation rather than just giving it to Oxbow Park directly?
Yeah, good question, good question. Yeah. So, okay. So the first question was,
Do you write?
yes, we do write many grants. Last year, I think we wrote 15 and we got 8. We did not get the U.S. Treasury money last year. We were really disappointed where our score was about 7, and the scores needed to be higher. It's a 1 to 10. Unfortunately, just the kind of a sad story, the gentleman who we had hired to write our CDFI grant actually passed away in a heart attack, and his son called us about 4 weeks before the final grant was due, so we did our best to write that ourselves. And I don't know if you've ever written a grant for a U.S. or the national things are just so complicated, every T and et cetera. So yes, we do write grants. Second question. There are some advantages to working with us, and I'll tell you Steve Orkhart's story. Have you ever heard his story? You know, he's the former sheriff of Olmsted County. His first wife passed away of cancer. He had money from her will and some other money that came in from friends, right? And so she had passed away at the Hope Lodge. And he decided to donate to Hope Lodge. I think he gave like $40,000, and a room is named after. And one of the things he said, we have a little video where he talks about this. He said, you know, that was good. You know, I felt good about honoring my wife. But he said, had I given through the foundation that $40,000, he said, over the number of years, my daughter, when I pass away, my daughter would still be giving to Hope Lodge for generations and more money. And he did a calculation, something like, yes, he gave $40,000, but if he had given it through the foundation and yearly there would be some money going to Hope Lodge, he would have actually already given $68,000 to Hope Lodge. And he said, so it isn't like it's horrible that you shouldn't, but that's another way where that endowment piece really can grow forever and ever. And he said his daughter, after he would pass, his daughter could continue to give in his mom's memory, or her mom's memory, for generations to come. And that's where the endowment piece that we have allows that to happen. So, does that explain a little bit? Yeah. Yeah, Lois?
Well, that sounds like magic. So, what is the key to the magic that endowments can do that?
Yeah, the key to endowments is really a couple of things. One is that we are more conservative in investing, and we in 2008 it was a rough year. In my previous endowment work, we had lost about $85,000. And I remember opening that envelope and thinking, oh my God, I have a heart attack. That the foundation that I was working at had lost that. However, it's grown since then. So you may put a certain amount of money in. As I showed in that one slide where the 10,000 is, you never put anything else in, but if it's endowed, you actually were giving out about 40,000, and I think there was left about 36 or something like that. That's where the endowment work can really be a benefit. I will say this, we have many who are donor advised funds who choose not to endow them because they want to give it all during their lifetime. And that's fine, we are more than happy to work, and they make the choices. Sometimes though, it is a donor who says, for a while I'm going to keep this as a non-endowed fund, but when I pass, I want it endowed, whatever's left, and I want it to go to a field of interest. Might be the environment, or an arts group, or a diversity group, or a health organization. And in fact, I will say, we have an individual last month who called in at Mayo and wanted to make a contribution to Mayo. you have to open an account there for $250,000 as an endowed account. So he's opening it with us, and he's growing it here, but he wants it to go to Mayo. So that's fine. That's very fine. But he doesn't have the resources to do the 250,000. So I think I got the numbers right. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, here we go.
There's talk about going to a flat tax in this country. Yeah. And maybe that would do away with the charitable deductions. Do you have any thoughts about what that would do to charitable giving and philanthropy in this country?
That's an interesting question. I think there are some people whose assets are really concerned and make a donation because it drops their charitable or drops their taxes down. There are others who are just flat out charitable, and it wouldn't matter if the tax was flat or not, they would give. And my understanding about philanthropy over the years is there's more giving to, guess what the giving is most to? Churches. Your church is the most philanthropic. All churches are the highest amount of philanthropic money that comes through. So, and you know, some people, I don't know whether that will really take place or not. It's certainly been an interesting conversation, especially at this election time coming up. Yeah. Yes.
What percentage does the Area Foundation take from a donor?
Yep, thank you for that question. The question is, we charge an administrative fee if you have a donor advised fund, which is not endowed, it's 1%. Once it goes over 500,000, the numbers go down to 0.85, and then it goes down to 0.65. If you are a nonprofit, we charge an administrative fee of it's under 1, so 0 or 8. And then it goes down to 6, and then it goes down even further. If it's a community organization or a community affiliate, it can be as little as 0.4%. So the average of community foundations throughout the Midwest, their charge is usually at 2%. So we're quite a bit under most everyone else, and that helps us to run the organization as well as to be able to have unrestricted money for the community.
We need to kind of wrap this up now and get the people upstairs
Yep.
so they can give the money to the church.
Thank you, sir.
We appreciate the information that Joann's given us this morning and hope that it's a benefit to you and to her organization. Thank you, Joann.
Yep.